Good afternoon. For those that I've not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Maria Cardiellos, and I am the Executive Director of the IJIS Institute. On behalf of the Institute, we welcome you to the 2020 IJIS Cyber Standards Check webinar. Given the numerous challenges that face our real and cyber worlds daily, it is imperative that we bring together critical resources to ensure we meet the goals and objectives of our mission partners, as well as secure our cyber assets in the process. Protecting our electronic environments and all the data that it represents is the focus of today's webinar. Under the umbrella of the IJIS Springboard Certification Program, our team presents our CyberScheck tool that you may have heard of in the past. As with many successful initiatives, these accomplishments are a result of successful partnerships. Today, we highlight our partnership with Fifth Column, a member of the IJIS family. Without getting into too much detail, some of the high-level attributes to be aware of include the following. It's a standards-based vulnerability scanner as part of the Springboard program. It's a turnkey tool that quickly identifies weaknesses or bugs in both web and mobile applications and provides easy-to-understand recommendations on how to fix the problem. And it's a simple, secure, and affordable application security standard testing tool to help ensure the protection of your applications and data. To delve into the value of the Springboard program, as well as the CyberStandardsCheck tool, we have several key players that will contribute to the program today. They include Ashwini Dural, former Executive Director and current co-founder and Chief Operating Officer of Idea4, a new data integration and data security firm that provides security and management technology to public health, safety, homeland security, social service, educational institutions, as well as to the private sector organizations. We will introduce our Springboard program, the CyberCheck tool, and the value to both public and private sector clients. Nils Lindakin leads business development efforts at Fifth Column and will be leading us through a full demonstration of the tool. Before that demo, however, he will provide us some valuable background on our third speaker, Ray Hicks, founder and CEO of Fifth Column. He has expertise and experience in cybercheck security and innovative technologies that span several decades. Today, he will give us a brief history as to the criticality of cyber threats and the pervasiveness of same. Without further delay, I pass the virtual speaker to Ashwini for his presentation.
Thanks, Maria. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, just a quick reminder, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please click on the chat option on the right-hand side of your screen and type your question, and we'll take some of those questions right after our presentation. And if we're not able to answer all the questions, we'll do a follow-up with you so we can answer those questions. So again, thanks for this opportunity, Maria and the IJIS Institute, to talk about the Cyber Standards Check. As Maria said, this has been something that we have been working on at the IJIS Institute for now almost 2 years. We had learned a lot with our partnership with Fifth Column, but also based on the feedback that we have received from the community. When we use the word community, from the justice and public safety community, from health and human services, and also from our partners in the private sector. So during this presentation, I will quickly cover the background on why CyberStandardsCheck was launched, and also provide you the value to protect your IT assets using CyberStandardsCheck. So one of the reasons CyberStandardsCheck was launched to help government agencies, especially, as you can see on this chart, that justice and public safety agencies are of high risk of getting their IT assets compromised, their data get taken away. And so one of the things that we thought was that what will be beneficial is to help government agencies and the business partners they do business with to have a tool that is affordable, that is easy to use, but also is a valuable assets to the executives who are actually responsible for managing their day-to-day operations and making a key decisions to protect their agencies. So one of the things that we looked at is that how we can bring a tool in partnership with the private sector that is affordable and easy to use for the agencies. Next slide, please. I'm sure you're aware of some of these headlines, and especially within the justice and public safety, and this is just a small example. And I'm sure that you all are aware of some of the challenges that we face as a nation during this election life cycle, with some of the systems get compromised, especially the government agencies at federal, state, and local. But also, one of the biggest hack in the healthcare provider, service provider, that was their system was compromised and a lot of data was taken away. So this is becoming a new normal for us, where we are seeing these kind of headlines on daily basis, but where we can play our little part is to bring a solution that is going to help agencies protect their assets and not become a front page headline or a headline in anywhere. So they are actually focusing on protecting their IT assets. Next slide. So one of the reasons why justice and public safety agencies are targeted, and we're just using this as an example because that is where IJIS's mission circles around, but now going into Homeland and Health and Human Services. This is something, even though the slide depicts why law enforcement or criminal justice agencies are being systems are being hacked or compromised, but this is a story across all level of government and even in some of the private sector, because some of the systems that are operational right now are old. They are not being kept up to date with some of the patches, with some of the basic cyber hygiene. So that is one of the key reasons that these agencies that especially are mid to small size cannot afford a solution or cannot afford a resources to address cyber threats. And there's another reason why the CyberStandardsCheck can be of a valuable asset to these small to mid-sized agencies. Next slide. So CyberStandardsCheck is being launched as part of the Springboard Certification program. As you all know, that IJIS Institute has been managing Springboard Certification program for the last 7 to 8 years approximately. And this program was launched to provide an independent evaluation and certification program. It was designed to help advance information sharing in the justice, public safety, homeland security, health, and human services. And most importantly, it was designed to provide independent evaluation and certification on use of some of the information sharing standards, and now including cyber standards. Next slide. So what is CyberStandardsCheck? CyberStandardsCheck is an offering to provide not just, I would say, the government agencies, but also to the private sector to protect their information technology assets, and also use best practices and standards that exist. For example, NIST 800-53, which provides a key foundation to protect your IT assets under the NIST risk management framework. So you all can actually start moving in that direction. If you're not already using and conforming to those standards, this CyberStandardsCheck provides you with this capability to conform to those cyber standards and best practices. But above all, it is simple, it is secure, it is affordable. When you use the CyberStandardsCheck, you're not storing your software code, you're not storing your application, and which Ray and Niels will talk about in their presentation. So there's nothing that is being stored in the tool that can impact your security and privacy of your information assets. Next slide. So lots of justice and public safety agencies, or I would say even the government agencies, who cannot afford cyber protection resources to do a good job of protecting their cyber assets. We know that a lot of agencies actually do a very good job of protecting their network and following some of the basic cyber hygiene. But what we have done a lot of research in building this capability that sometimes your networks are protected, you are following all the basic cyber hygiene to protect your perimeter, but when it comes to your software assets, your mobile applications, there's a lot of vulnerability that exists. So Cyber Standards was launched because of the overwhelming control and enabled by software, where public safety agencies are so much dependent on the software. Everything is now software driven. And when we look at in justice and public safety, to your record management system, to your CAT system, to your NG911, is going to be a lot of software components in it, and you want to make sure that those are protected. And one of the things that when you even do some of the cyber threats, how these systems are being compromised, software is the key component where the sometime vulnerability exists. So these hackers are targeting those vulnerabilities to commit those malicious attacks. And the reality is that chances of getting hacked in this environment where we live in a connected world, where we have a lot of cyber virtual systems that are being used. So more connectivity, more virtual cyber threats increases. So one of the goals for CyberStandardsCheck is to reduce that risk. Next slide. So the value of CyberStandardsChecks is to help the government agencies and the private sector companies to integrate best practices and cyber standards into your day-to-day operations, into your day-to-day technology needs. And as you're using those technology, the goal is to conform to those standards and reduce the risk by as much as automation that we can offer through the CyberStandardsCheck. We know that a lot of controls that exist in some of the standards cannot be automated, but our goal is to validate those controls and conformance to those controls, automate as much as possible, but still with human validation. CyberStandardsCheck provides secure web-based access. It's plug and play, easy to use. You point to your software where it is and run a scan, and you will see the results, which Niels will demonstrate here shortly. But also the goal here is to provide everyone with a continuous monitoring tool to address the cyber threat that exists in your source code, mobile, or web apps. Next slide, please. If you want to learn more about CyberStandardsCheck or IJIS Institute, please visit ijis.org, and there is more detailed information on CyberStandardsCheck. At this point, I will hand it over to Niels to introduce Ray Hicks. Niels.
Thank you, Ashwini. Now, I want to start off by thanking all of you in attendance. It's been a pleasure working with the IJIS team on this webinar. My name is Nils Lindaken, and I represent Fifth Column, which is a cybersecurity firm out of Chicago. And we have been working in partnership with IJIS as a member of the community for several years now. Now, to begin our presentation, I'd like to introduce you to Fifth Column's founder and chief innovation officer, Ray Hicks. Ray is recognized by the U.S. government as one of the key innovators and deployment leaders for new technologies and solutions within the justice, defense, and intelligence communities. Now, how Ray began his work in the government, that's a pretty unique story. So when Ray was working at UUNet, living on the East Coast, his lab was hacked actually by a foreign state. And Ray being Ray, as a response to this attack, Ray designed his own campaign to counterattack the foreign state. Now, fast forward to the following Monday, when Ray got into work, the NSA was actually in his office as they had been attacked by the same foreign state as UUNet, and were so impressed by their observation and the effectiveness of the counterattack that he had put together that they hired him on the spot. And this began Ray's career working for the government. Among Ray's other accomplishments, which you can see on the screen here, in 2002, when Homeland Security was founded following the attacks on September 11th, Ray was appointed chief architect responsible for stitching together over 90 different intelligence agencies that weren't sharing data securely. In 2004, Ray founded a company called Looking Glass prior to exiting in the D round to pursue other interests here in Chicago. Ray founded Fifth Column in 2012 to really combat some of the problems that he had seen through both the public and private sectors. In that, with cybersecurity specifically, was even with the best-in-class products and a budget to hire just about as many people as you needed, there was still a massive void that he noticed in the effectiveness and the resource demands by tackling this problem with other technologies. There are roughly 35 to 4,500 different security tools available to purchase in market today. And we at Fifth Column view that as a compounding issue because we can all see from the news, as Ashwini just pointed out, that the number of breaches only continues to increase. What Ray is about to get into in the background of CyberStandardsCheck is the truth is, if we really just try to solve cybersecurity problems by simply relying on humans and using technology instead of a standard or framework-based approach such as NIST, we're never really going to solve the problem. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ray.
Thanks for the introduction, Nils, and any of you that have been recruited by any federal agencies know it doesn't quite go exactly that way, but close enough. So good job. Thank you very much for that. My name is Ray Hicks. I am the founder and innovation officer here at Fifth Column, and want to just start off by again reiterating how pleased we are not only to be a member of IJIS, but also a part of this collaboration, which is an excellent testament to the power of public-private collaboration. And furthermore, that this is just the tip of the spear in terms of what we've demonstrated as possible and where we're heading. Before we talk about that, I oftentimes find it very useful to take a look at where we've been as it relates to the compounding threats that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so in that vein, going back to the 70s, the beginning of what we call the digital era, well, even though a lot of it was still analog, we had the first introduction of computer-based viruses and worms and other nefarious software programs of that nature. You move into the 80s, you start to get introduced to the concept of leave behind applications, Trojans, viruses, and an agenda to develop an increasingly more sophisticated and stealth-like viruses that are harder to detect by common countermeasures like antivirus. Going back to the early 80s, mid-late 80s, into the 90s, malware authoring has now evolved into an international community that is comprised of all types of individuals contributing at mass, largely driven by the rapid evolution of what we'll call a, quote, digital black market, based on the varying value of your information assets. We'll get into that a little bit more here in a moment, but there is a shelf life to different types of data elements, and as such, there is a higher price tag for certain types of information, as well as how long of a window you could expect it to be before that would manifest itself in the public domain. Moving into the 2000s, we really saw the level of dereliction in terms of the prevalence of malware and the destructiveness of it skyrocket. Some of this was based on sleight of hand. In other words, attackers were using increasingly destructive tactics and techniques as a means to disrupt the operation of an organization's infrastructure. And while you were busy fighting that fire, they were crawling in the back window. That may be an oversimplification of the scenario, but I think the point is easily absorbed in that analogy. And as we move through the 2010s into today, I think that everyone's familiar with command and control servers and identity spoofing, and a lot of what we'll call ransomware, and malware that is reusable in the sense that make a few changes to a couple of the key elements that comprise the malware. It's staged and delivered in a manner that is a level of orchestration and automation goes beyond what we see in many mature enterprises, but is polymorphic in the sense that it changes its digital signature such that signature engines, hashes, indicators are all highly variable. And so a lot of the next generation solutions in market today have attempted to solve that by throwing an immense amount of horsepower at it, such that every file, every variable that enters your computer, your environment, is intercepted before it's written to disk and detonated in a virtual sandbox. So that creates a tremendous amount of data. That data is not all intelligence. The pieces of it that become intelligent, are somewhat subjective, but ultimately need to be categorized as such, folded back into a process which allows us to leverage that. And that is what we have done here with the CyberStandardsCheck. We're taking a library of known susceptible conditional variables as it relates to source code and allowed ourselves the opportunity to identify that at the earliest possible point. So during the development of an application, such that it never gets an opportunity to run in a production environment where it would create such an exposure. As Shwini mentioned, and you'll hear us continually reiterate, we are very centered around standards, using NIST 800 series as our gold standard benchmark for best practices. 853, 800, 171 provide a tremendous amount of guidance in terms of control objectives. And there's certainly no shortage of technologies available to meet and oftentimes exceed the defined control objectives. We opted to also include OWASP for what would be obvious reasons. Thank you for changing slides. OWASP is a community-driven organization that is primarily focused on educating around the high susceptibility of web applications and the expansive sprawl of web applications that was largely driven by the proliferation of mobile applications and the web application frameworks that they interface with in order to deliver the mobile experience. So the compounding issues there are largely related to the various technology stacks in play and the ability to spin them up quickly and replicate them laterally for scale, such that they could accommodate a growing user base. Problem therein lies that any component of that technology stack, and if we go back to, say, probably the most familiar one for those of us with any gray hairs, the old LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, or Python, Perl. You can substitute a number for the last letter of that acronym, but that technology stack was used so extensively that there were frameworks built that allowed you to customize and stylize these applications to your heart's content. The problem was they were replicated at such a global scale that if a vulnerability existed in one, it was absolutely persistent in anybody else that was using that framework. So OWASP has done a good job of synthesizing what they would call the top 10 threats to web applications. There are a number of web application technologies that allow you to front end these types of systems as a means of providing compensatory controls short of a rewrite. But when it comes to actually solving the issue and removing yourself as a target. The only option is ultimately to either change the technology stack or change the conditional variabilities that make you a susceptible target or an ideal target for the threat actors themselves. Next slide. Being standards-based, aligning with the NIST CSF, we really like this, this loop, if you will, and you'll find it repeated consistently in most of the governance related materials, as well as the way our methodology tends to work as well. So you can't protect what you don't know about. So identify is obviously stage one, step one. I think identify speaks to discovery, as well as inventory, catalog, and baseline the assets that are specific to the delivery of an application, a capability, a use case, etc. And documenting that such that it can be effectively managed in alignment with its core business mission. Somewhere along the lines, the line between production systems and their role relative to a core business mission kind of got blurred. And so what we see is iterative stages along the development of an application's lifecycle that may end up resident online somewhere. That creates a tremendous amount of risk. And then we also have risks that exist by way of legacy applications that had susceptible conditions that just weren't known to be susceptible at the time that they were developed. That could be on the operating system they run on, or any one of the technical components that they rely on within any tier within the application itself. The issue being that there is no easy way for a layperson or a non-developer to tear that apart and identify, is it a code-specific problem? Is it an architecture-specific problem? Is it a technology stack-specific problem? Or is it a combination of all three? And so you can address some of that through some of the hygiene-related elements. Right? Is the system that the application runs on free and clear of any known vulnerabilities? If not, what can you do to remedy that? But the idea of being able to map out and identify these components moves us on to the second phase of protecting these assets with compensatory controls. For any given condition, you are going to have inherent risk. You apply your compensatory controls by way of process, tooling, technologies, and people, and you're left with the residual risk, and that residual risk should be the baseline which you measure to and attempt to maintain a risk profile that does not exceed that threshold. This requires diligent ongoing maintenance of said system, as well as access to and timely access, I should say, to information relative to the variable components that your application is built with, such that any new information that suggests your infrastructure or application or any of the components it runs on at risk, you are not only informed about it, but you have an opportunity to take action before there becomes a exploit available in the wild that could take advantage of the condition that you now find yourself in. Next slide, please. So one of the largest issues in combining a best practices framework with regulatory governance and not just public sector but also private sector organizations is what we refer to as a context conundrum, or the reuse of words in a manner that is interpreted either incorrectly or in a manner that is outside the bounds of what it was intended use was. And so in terms of context and risk profiling, we have very easily distilled this information down into a methodology that adheres to the CSS framework for measuring and categorizing risk, but also the maturity of the processes by which you would manage that process. So, when we look at the maturity models that are used to define the repeatability and efficacy of a given process or outcome, the partially implemented, non-repeatable, adaptive, non-adaptive, these are all synonymous with your CMMI and other common maturity models that exist in market, as well as aligning to the newly released cybersecurity maturity model that is somewhat an extension of the DFARS requirement. So, once you have these control objectives in place, there's a responsibility to manage them in accordance with the evolving threat landscape, which means that we would expect to see not only a process that defines the ongoing maintenance of those, but also your ability to demonstrate that activity has been taking place over a given period of time. So when we talk about an easy button for the way our solutions and products are architected and delivered, that easy button is meant to capture that full life cycle and allow you to demonstrate in a non-refutable manner your adherence to not only those best practices, but also your repeated and continued adherence to a maturity model that suggests that you're not a risk now and that you never have been over said period of time. And there's quite a bit of uplift around why you would do that, especially if there is information within your systems that does appear somewhere out on the public web in the future. There will be a significant amount of effort trying to tie that information back to the organization in which it was retrieved. And to the extent that you have the ability to demonstrate that you are not at fault, that will go a long way in terms of any fiscal penalties that may be levied. One of the more recent and more erroneous attacks against Equifax, is one that I think speaks directly to how little people understand about the value of information and the shelf life information has based on the type of information it is. Credit card information has a very short shelf life. Most people who realize that their credit card number has been compromised will simply order a new credit card. When it comes to personally identifiable information or your identity itself, it's not that simple. So your identity has a much longer shelf life, and so you can expect that information to get more valuable over time as they supplement it with additional information to further substantiate that they are you. This may be previous employers, previous addresses you've lived at, types of cars that you've owned, loans that you may have taken out. And eventually they will start perpetrating on your behalf such that they have the narrative and you don't. And you take it from somebody who's witnessed this firsthand. It's quite a spectacle to see somebody arguing that they are who they are, and the person on the other side of the courtroom is not them. When they both have a driver's license and birth certificates that suggest they are. So in Equifax's case, identity was the data in question. And knowing full well that data is not going to hit the marketplace for probably 4 to 5 years, they turned that into an opportunity, being the enterprising group that they are. And so they offered you a year's worth of free credit offering or free identity monitoring. And at the end of that year, everyone's going to say, wow, what a great job they did. Our identity remained safe during that entire period, at which time they will convert you to a paying customer for that service. And again, know that they're not at risk for that being fenced, likely for another 3-4 years at minimum, maybe longer, as people start to identify that the individual identities are the most valuable asset because it facilitates access to credit, facilitates access to banks, facilitates access to trusts, facilitates access to anything you'd have as you as a person. Next slide. Yeah, threat actors are not alone. They're not the only enemy. Complacency ultimately within the organization is a death blow, for lack of a better term. Anything outside your own infrastructure and likely everything within your infrastructure can absolutely be weaponized against you. And should it fall under the control of the wrong hands, it will be, directly or indirectly. Security, I really don't like just using the word or concept security on its own. Nothing you do in information technology should be done in a manner that is not taking security into heavy consideration. Most often the case, information technology is viewed as a liability, even though their businesses could not survive without it today. And so we're starting to see a change in the mindsets of organizations and how they leverage IT and how that helps them fulfill on their core business mission. So much so that we had one of the largest hospitality companies globally. Their CEO told me yesterday that they are no longer a pizza company that utilizes technology. They are a technology company that delivers pizzas. And that is 100% a true statement. If you're going to own and operate your own infrastructure, you are essentially running two businesses. You're running an IT business, and then you are leveraging that IT infrastructure to the benefit of your core business mission. And so, that is that can be crippling for some organizations. And so, I think that it allows an organization to assess the concept of a trusted advisor partner model and removing the subjective nature of product selection and all of that. None of that can be done without having fully qualified, meaningful metrics that are audience specific. In other words, they can be consumed by their audience. And so everything about what you're going to see is meant to be able to contextualize that information in a manner that makes it consumable, because it would be nonsensical to buy or invest in technologies in a control category where you already have more than ample coverage when you have gaps in other areas, within that control framework of best practices. And that is never how it gets presented to executive management. So I think that in trying to keep with within the time window here and allow you guys to see some of what we've been able to bring to the table here over the last 12 months in partnership with IJIS. I would challenge you all to consider, how well you know what's on your infrastructure, whether it's supposed to be there, how well it's being managed, and is there anything that is contextually aware of these component technologies and orchestrating across them as one seamless solution. With that, I think Nils is going to take us into a product demo.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
As outlined before, CyberStandardsCheck is a cloud and web-based source code scanner developed in partnership with the IJIS Institute. The tool allows for analysis of both static and dynamic code for detection of any security vulnerabilities in source code, mobile apps, and web applications. The demonstration will be between 10 and 15 minutes. It'll be broken into 3 parts. First, we're going to cover the executive summary dashboard and different team dashboards within the tool. Second, we'll cover off and walk through on how CyberStandardsCheck actually works. And we'll actually perform a couple of scans on a local source code repository. And then finally, we'll show you kind of what the front end piece of how this is integrated in with the IJIS website and how you can access that and learn more. So when a customer first logs into CyberStandardsCheck, the first dashboard that you will see is the executive or home screen. Now this landing page is designed to give you a high level or summarized overview of the scan results done by your team. You'll see right away the analytics details within the various categories of the NIST cybersecurity framework, which are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. The NIST cybersecurity framework was designed to provide a policy framework, as Ray was just referring to data and information security guidance for how organizations in the United States can assess and improve their ability to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber attacks. Now, to echo Ray's comments from before, we designed this tool in partnership with IJIS specifically to validate conformance or application source code to this standard. Now, as you scroll down the executive summary dashboard, you're going to see an indication of severity levels for the vulnerabilities the tool has already identified. I already have a few different scans that are loaded into the tool so that it can show some results for you guys. The status of the scans you have, whether they're scheduled, queued, or completed, the status of your team's progress in working on these vulnerabilities, and then your top vulnerable code repositories and vulnerabilities within the repositories or scans that have been conducted. The final piece I wanted to touch on before moving on to the other dashboards is the application mode designation and the number of target repositories you have available to you and your team within this instance of CyberStandardsCheck. We'll cover this more in detail toward the end, but there are a couple of different subscription levels. But what I'm demonstrating to you right now is the enterprise version of the platform so that I can show the team and collaborative functionality of the tool. And as I'm going through the demonstration, you'll see these various information icons across the various dashboards. And these are what you can hover over to really understand truly what the field is displaying and learn more about what it is that's on the screen. We're going to move on to the main scan result dashboard of the tool here, which, as you'll see when the screen refreshes, defaults to your source code scan results. Again, right away, you are given a visual showing the conformance of or otherwise non-conformance of your source code scans to the NIST Special Publication 853. The center pie chart is showing the number of vulnerabilities found by CyberStandardsCheck ranked, again, by severity of the vulnerabilities discovered. And then finally, on the right, you're seeing these severity levels broken down by specific application repository or code base. So the example that I have down here, we just have one currently within this instance that we're looking at. As you look to the lower part of the dashboard, you're going to see the categories of the OWASP top 10, and these vulnerabilities broken down by severity. Now, the Open Web Application Security Project, or OWASP, which Ray was referencing the slide before, provides guidance to developers and security professionals on the most critical vulnerabilities that are commonly found in applications, which are also easy to exploit. So these 10 application risks are dangerous, as you'd imagine, because they can allow attackers to plant malware, steal data, or even completely access your systems through that source code. Now, the bottom left graph here is showing vulnerability identification trending over time and can be adjusted to show progress or improvement as you and your team address, fix, and then continue to scan your applicable applications code bases. Now, the panel on the left here, you're able to toggle between the various types of scans that we have: source code scans, web application scans, and I do also have a mobile app scan that's already loaded into the tool. And it's a very similar view, which we will click into shortly. Now, before we go into some of the scan results, I do want to just show you briefly the applications home, which is a summary of all the applications that you're scanning by name. So I have a Go programming language test as well that's currently running. And then also the All Analytics home, which you'll recognize from the executive summary dashboard and the details within the various categories of the NIST cybersecurity framework: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Okay, so back on the dashboard view, now you're going to see the areas of these pie charts increase in size as I hover over each of these colors or segments of the pie chart that you can actually select. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll go into the medium category here, just so you can see that those are able to be clicked into. But I'm going to go ahead and clear these filters so that now you see the full response of the tool as it scanned the platform here. And this is where at the bottom down in the profile results is really where you and your development teams or QA team are going to really find value in the CyberStandardsCheck tool, in that you can open these various results, and this is where you're going to find the information about what it found on that specific vulnerability, where you need to be looking to fix the vulnerability. And then it also provides you a link to the common weaknesses enumeration database. And again, as you hover over each of the icons within this tool, these are going to range from vulnerability type, the details and descriptions. These are unique variables that will change reflecting that individual scan's results. So again, vulnerability type, details or descriptions, and even the line number, as you can see at the bottom, and snippet of code within the application or repository where the vulnerability can be found. Now, this tool is designed to give your application, web, and code developers the ability to track and understand the quality of the code that's going into production. And we, again, designed this tool to be a collaborative solution that bridges the gap really between security, development, and QA teams. And whether you're using the tool on a team or as a single, a team of one or with a team of many, it's really designed to help users track and understand the quality of the code that's going into production. Now, before we move on, I do want to highlight again the common weakness enumeration area that's connected to this specific. Bear with me as I share. So this specific CWE page, and this is, pardon that, I had to open up it opens in a new window. Now this is what is specific. The CWE is a category system for the software weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and it's sustained by a community project with the goals of understanding flaws in software and creating automated tools that can then be used to identify, fix, and prevent those flaws. This database is sponsored by the National Security FFRDC, with support from US CERT and the National Cybersecurity Division of the US Department of Homeland Security. And this is where it breaks down the type of code, specific language, applicable platforms in which these vulnerabilities might be found. reasons as to why this should draw the user's or developer's attention, and then the likelihood that it could be exploited, and then gives further examples and potential ways to correct these issues. So now I'm going to switch back to showing the tool itself, and we're going to go ahead and load in a scan and add a target that we can all run together, and can see how easy this is. So in order to add a scan target, you need to, as you saw up here, go to add target, and then we're going to do a couple of different things. Now I want to take a moment to point out that the tool can scan repositories that reside in public clouds, like GitLab or Bitbucket, for example. But then also we can scan locally if you don't want to upload your code to our system, as Ray referenced before. An example would be customers who don't perhaps want their code in a public repository as a purpose in terms of an extra layer of security. So I'm going to go ahead and run a local scan for code that I simply have saved on my laptop, which again is for folks who don't want to even upload their code to run on our system. It'll scan locally and generate the results right here on my machine that you'll be able to see. So I'm going to go ahead and run a C++ test. We can kick that off, and in the meantime, I'll also add a mobile app. I do also have an iOS mobile application that I can run. Now the tool can, in terms of mobile applications, can scan Android, iOS, and Windows apps. And there's also, we have a long list of other coding languages available for source code, including C++, Java, JavaScript, Ruby, just to name a few. So due to the size of this, it's going to take just an extra moment to begin running. But as you can see, here are a couple of scans that I just kicked off. And again, this is in the field where you're going to see these scans started, completed, and see some information about the scans. Whatever I chose to name them, the date and time at which it was kicked off, and then obviously the status of the scan running at that time. And then this is where you're able to go into the results of these various scans. So I'm going to go into a source code scan that I'd run before. It looks like we may already have the results of our C+ scan. So I'm going to access through this way, which is another view in order to look at the vulnerability status specifically within this various code base that I was scanning. So within this view, this is where you can see that CyberStandardsCheck also enables users to version their scans, compare versions, integrate versions into JIRA, and then assign tickets to backlogs, for example, if your team is a team that uses JIRA. At the bottom of the screen, this is where you're also able to make comments to other folks that perhaps are in this environment with you, if this is a team environment. And then at the time that I update that, perhaps I'm going to go open or fix in progress or close, depending on the status of where this is within the team's lifecycle. And a final piece here I do want to touch on, I understand we're getting close to the end of time here, is really the API references. We have some advanced features within CyberStandardsCheck that customers can see, like API reference, that if companies want to integrate with their internal tools, simply by clicking show and hide, you can see that more options help customers integrate directly. So in this instance, to perform these operations and run a scan remotely. So if you're using Jenkins and developing your code through CyberStandardsCheck, you could call this API and run a scan against a repository, then get the results finding the API below, then by simply clicking show and hide. So think of the tool really as the struts and does all the scans, but what we can integrate with JIRA for bug and defect tracking, and so that your developers can integrate with CyberStandardsCheck to your choice of tools on your DevOps. Okay, I do see that there are a few questions here. Bear with me, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing this screen, as this is the end of the demo, if you will, and we wanted to allow some time for a few questions. Again, thank you very much for the time and attention. We are kind of running to the end, but in the case that we're going to circulate this deck with the link that you see on the screen, where you can access to learn more, and also reach out to any of the folks that are on this webinar, and we can engage in direct one-on-one conversations with you all and make sure that the questions are answered.
Thanks, Nils. I think there were a few questions. So people are interested in learning more and also with the pricing. So we'll send the link. And as Nils mentioned, we'll share the link with everyone so you can look at the information on the tool itself and also the pricing. And I know there was a question also here that does CyberStandardsCheck keep any information about my code? So I did respond it in the chat box, but the answer is no. We basically use the tool to point to your source code repositories and run a scan against that repository. And the only thing that the tool actually stores is the metadata for us to calculate the conformance to the different standards. So when Nils was showing different level of conformance and those kind of things, that's the only information we'll store. If there's a vulnerability in your source code itself, we'll tell you exactly where it is and which line. So that is something that we store just for reporting purposes, but also this tool is also available in the localized version. You can download it, put it in your own environment, because we know a lot of folks are very sensitive to exposing the source code in the public setting. So there's a localized version also available for this tool. So you can download, scan. The only thing that we're working on is to ensure that that tool is always kept updated based on the different libraries that we get access to, depending on the different vulnerabilities. So that is the other option that is available. Ray or Nils, I don't know if you want to add anything on top of, especially in context of the localized version of the tool.
One thing I will add is, in the context of information sharing, it's not hard to see ourselves in a situation where you have completed an application and has not been scanned again because the code has not been iterated upon, or it's sunset in favor of the development of a new application. That doesn't mean that vulnerabilities are not always evolving and being identified, even years after the fact. And so it's something that we are keenly aware of, and are assembling a way for us to communicate, even for people that no longer subscribe to the tool. If we know that there's a condition that exists in a piece of code somewhere and who's it's attributable to, we will inform you about it.
Thanks, Ray. So there's another question: what languages does this tool support? So Ray or Nils, do you want to just quickly answer that?
Sure. There's and we can circulate a list along with the webinar here, but certainly Ruby, Java, JavaScript, PHP. Ray probably could reference even more, but there's a pretty long list.
It's a very long list. It's growing all the time. Rust, Go, a lot of the automation languages, Python. It's meant to be comprehensive for a reason. C, C++, C#, C++, Swift. I would encourage you to go to the collateral pages and make sure. And if there's a language that you're looking for that we don't have support for currently, it's likely on the roadmap. It's very easy for you to push a request into the team to see what the horizon is for that language.
Thanks, Ray. So I know we are right at 3 o'clock. Thanks everyone for attending the webinar. If you want to learn more about this, please reach out for one of the folks on this webinar. Also visit the page, and as Nils said in closing, we will circulate the slides. We'll send the information out to all the attendees. And once again, thanks for attending this webinar. Hopefully you found this information valuable and you will be able to use this tool. And we're excited with IJIS Institute to be launching this tool in partnership with Fifth Column. We hope that this can help your agency, your company in protecting your software code, mobile app, and web app. And again, thanks, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll be circulating the slides as soon as this webinar is done. Thanks.
Thank you.